Hello, guys. So, in this content, I want us to briefly talk about emergency fund. We live in a world where problems in some way has become part of our daily living. And the Money magazine estimates that about 78% of us will experience a major unexpected event in our life. So the major question that comes up is, if this major event is to happen to you, what will you do? And the intriguing aspect is that most of these events, in some way, is associated with money. The solution solely depends on the money you have with you. So this brings to mind the essential or the importance of having an emergency fund. So we are going to talk about an emergency fund. We will look at some of the situations that can be categorized as an emergency. We will look at how much you need to have in your emergency fund and how to set up an emergency fund. And as a young person, it's very essential if you want to live a peaceful life, if you want to be able to answer calls from your families, from your friends, without the fear of they coming to, break a bad news to you that will be requiring a certain amount of money, then it's essential you take this video very, very serious. Now, problems will arise. It will definitely rain. When it rains, the question is, do you have an umbrella? Do you have do you have an amount set up to address that particular issue? It is very important. So we'll be looking at six main things in today's session. The first one is problem will arise, it will rain, and therefore it's important you definitely have an umbrella to cover yourself when the rain falls. And secondly, we are also looking at the worst time to borrow is when times are bad. Most at times, when an emergency or when an unexpected situation happens to us, the only way we can address that situation is to go and borrow to solve it, or is to go for a loan to solve it. And most at times, this creates a lot of problems between us and people because it's an emergency, it's something you least expected. So when the issue arise, you may decide to go to friends, families, or sometimes even go to the church for help. And if these people are unable to help you, you now become bitter towards them. You become bitter towards the church. You become bitter towards your friends. You become bitter towards your family, thinking that probably they have and they are not willing to help. But it's important to know that everyone is also facing a certain level of difficulties in their own life. Therefore, it's important for you to have an emergency fund in place for such events or for such unexpected situations. Therefore, what is an emergency fund? So I would say emergency fund or an emergency. Let's look at and what is classified as an emergency. An emergency is any situation that you least expected or you didn't know was going to happen to you. So any event or any situation that you least expected was going to happen to you, that's classified as an emergency. And an emergency fund must be easy to access. So first, we agree that problems will arise and therefore everyone needs an umbrella. Secondly, we said that the worst time to borrow is when something bad happens. Therefore, you don't have to wait for that bad time to happen before you begin saving towards emergencies. And thirdly, we are defining what an emergency is, which we've agreed to be anything you least or you didn't expect to happen in your life. It could be sickness, it could be car accident, it could be, any issues. It could be your TV suddenly not working again, any event that you didn't expect to happen. And four, emergency fund should be easily accessible. When you are setting aside an amount of money as your emergency fund, the idea or the rationale for the emergency fund is not to make profit, neither is it to invest to make money. The emergency fund is to serve as a security measure, is to help you in times of emergencies. Therefore, you need to put it in an account that is easily accessible. And one may ask, how big should this emergency fund be? It's researchers or financial scholars have a rule of thumb that states that your emergency fund needs to be about needs to be 3 to 6 months of your household expenditure. 3 to 6 months of your household expenditure. So the amount of money you will need to survive within 3 to 6 months in case you are not working, that amount needs to be set aside as your emergency fund. And 3 to 6 months, this money is set aside to curb any risky situation. Therefore, depending on your circumstances, you can decide to save 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months. If you are doing a job that has a very high tendency of collapsing or you being fired or sacked, then it means that you need a higher amount to put in place in case something like that happens. If you are self-employed, if you only rely on one source of income, then it's very important you have a higher amount, that's 6 months set aside. But if you are in a lucrative job where you are very certain about job security, then you can put aside something lesser, that's 3 months of your household expenditure. So guys, I'll quickly sum up whatever we've discussed today. First, it's important to note that as a young person or as anyone living, issues, unplanned issues will happen, and therefore you need money to address those issues. It will rain, and therefore you need an umbrella. Secondly, the worst time to borrow is when something bad happens. I'm saying this because most people may not be able to help you at that particular point in time, and therefore you become very bitter towards these people because of their inability to help you. Thirdly, we define an emergency to be any event or any situation you least expected or you didn't plan for it to happen. And the fourth point we looked at is that the emergency fund must be easily accessible. You need to put it in a savings account that you can withdraw anytime an emergency happens. You don't have to go and put it in a fixed deposit. You don't have to put it in an investment fund where you are going, whenever you need to withdraw, they are going to deduct an amount from you because the maturity period is not due. It needs to be easily accessible. And the next point we looked at is how big should your emergency fund be? And your emergency fund should be 3 to 6 months of your household expenditure. And the determinant or how you determine whether you need to put 3, 4, 5, or 6 months expenditure aside, it's dependent on your unique situation. If you are self-employed, if your job has a higher tendency of collapsing or being fired, then you need a higher amount to set aside. So guys, this is what we have for you today, and we'll see you in our next video.